Почитувани гости, следува третиот панел – фискални, монетарни и даночни политики во време на криза, на кој ќе разговараме за предизвиците и можностите за спроведување политики кои ќе обезбедат стабилност, сигурност и можност за понатамошен економски развој. Ги поканувам панелистите да ги заземат своите места.
Dear attendees, I hope we can get started. This is panel number 3 today, and as the time passes, concentration is more difficult to maintain. but we hope that we'll have a jump and introduce new energy so that you can survive 3 more days of this type of conference. Why is this session, this panel, going to be critical, interesting, and especially interesting for all the attendees and the ones viewing us online? Monetary and fiscal policies are the essence and core of all changes and processes taking place in the country, the basis for all policies and action plans discussed in the previous panels and sessions. So this is number one. Without a stable currency base, without a stable monetary banking sector, we cannot speak about the sustainable economic development. That's a key point. And number two is that we have extraordinary guests, pillars of all the departments in the States. We have Mr. Minister Besimi, then revenues and expenditures, determining, especially in terms of crisis. These are the first policies and institutions that are the first defense line, building the resilience in any economy in the conditions of crisis. This is the title. So fiscal policy, Mr. Besini. Then we have the Governor Bejoska, monetary policy that is extremely important for the stability. That was in the center of attention, key role in times of strengthening inflation and further tensions of the fiscal and monetary policies worldwide. Then we have the director of the Public Revenue Office, Ms. Lukarevska, who is the right hand of fiscal policy and the Ministry of Finance that reaches every citizen, every business. This is the context of collecting the revenues for the state, that is to say the taxes. That is the key pillar. Then we have Mr. Begetti, analyst, professor, rector of the Southeast European University that oftentimes discusses fiscal and monetary policies, and Mr. Bishev, who is sitting next to me, who is both a professor and advisor to the Prime Minister and a banker for a long-term experience, who can relevantly contribute to this topic and discussion. To be more efficient and more dynamic, we won't have 2 rounds. So we have a strong 1 round, and then we will open the floor for reflection in the context of all questions that will encourage us for further discussion. I would wish to start our discussion with our respected Minister Besimi. There is a general question, open one, extremely important in the conditions of consequential crisis. We have reduced consumption. We have support by the government through public expenditures. On the other hand, when it comes to public revenues, many issues are open in discussions. So I'm interested to know, in the context of the budget, the most general picture of the budget. This is an issue that we wish to open a bit more directly. Did you manage, or did we manage in the past period to make a qualitative structural movement in the budget, bearing in mind this difference that for a range of years we have been increasing the expenditures? So does this mean that revenue and expenditure sides match the challenges coming in the coming period? Reduced consumption, global recession, effective demand, lack of stability of prices and salaries. So to what extent the budget is going to handle those challenges? Do you think it's going to resolve them? And is sustainability a discussion that should be of our concern in the coming period? Thank you. Many questions, complex ones, and not simple ones. To answer them briefly is a serious challenge. So what I'm going to try to capture in terms of a few aspects is that we have to make a distinction in terms of what the macro interest is and what the micro aspect interest is, starting from budget users to social representatives and various interest groups. And the second aspect is how we should respond in the short term, mid-term and long term. And number 3, the needs and how much it costs us. So needs are going up and costs are going up too. So this is a triple challenge from all aspects, micro, macro, short-term, mid-term, and long-term, and in terms of funding the needs. So the word will be optimization and prioritization. And what does that mean? In times of crisis, everybody should intercept the main priorities of the crisis, and we will all agree. As a Minister of Finance, the challenge starts from implementing and designing those priorities with every single budget user, but they will give their own priorities from their own perspective, and this is a serious challenge, and I think that this is connected with the fact that in 2020, 2021, 22, new perspectives were created, the anti-crisis measures in times of a crisis, which is a new aspect, which took a lot of the funds and priorities. Then revenues went down in 2022, that is to say GDP, challenges to preserve the jobs. Then in 2021-22, we were faced with the energy crisis, and in 2022, we faced the huge costs on financial markets. Even if you wish to secure the money is very expensive, and also the funds were lacking on the market. This was a critical aspect in 2022. What is specific is how to restructure our economy in this crisis to something that is sustainable in the mid and long term, such as human capital, green transition, digitalization, and competitiveness, technological development, and how to attract human capital in the country. All of these matters are a huge challenge for a short time period, and something that was a common denominator is fiscal consolidation. So fiscal consolidation is to send a clear signal to investors that we as a country have already set our finances on a stable basis to support growth and to send another strong signal about the credibility of our policies. That this is not something we're going to do this year or next year or further on. Actually, we wish to build stable expectations. This is key in finance. So in spite of all the challenges in 2022, we managed to accomplish fiscal consolidation. Instead of 5.3, 4.3 is the deficit, 118 million euro less deficit, which gave rise to the projections. Instead of 61%, we ended the year with 57.1% of GDP. So we had smaller implementation of the expenditures than planned in specific numbers. As to the structure, there is significant restructuring within a short period of time. If in the last 10 and more years, more than 3% of GDP accounts for capital expenditures, this year it accounts for 5.5% of GDP, and last year somewhere at 4%. So this can be seen since 2012 onwards. For the first time, we've managed to return the golden rule that capital investments are more important. So we put these priorities in the context of policies. What should this money bring about? Sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Minister, to serve the time. Yes, the point is great in the context of structure and qualitative improvement of the budget, though it's not an easy matter, since it's a process that should take place in the midterm and through the policies. It can be seen in the context of this. We would move on with the second question to you that encourages us to ask you about the tax reform. And public revenues, we're discussing that a prerequisite to be able to make all the policies, expenditures, and all budgetary functions to be implemented. We've had a tax reform, and we know that in times of crisis it's difficult due to the sensitivity of entities, and we had certain tax reforms, and then we returned them, and then the progressive tax was introduced, and so forth. In the context of those tax reforms, do you think that you've done everything you could do in that sense? Could you have changed something more? Is there something that has not been fully completed in this tax reform in socio-political economy? It starts smelling like elections, and we're discussing this. So will you recuperate your courage to complete what you've started by the end of this year? So what should we be cautious about in that regard? So there are a few aspects, and the director of the Public Revenue Office will share her view. So first of all, this comes from the strategy. This that has been implemented is part of this major strategy. The fiscal aspect. The second is the fairness of the system, transparency, efficiency, green tax policy, and reduction of informal economy. In parallel to this is the reduction of informal economy and increase in revenues, and we returned a large amount of funds, but this is the point that was raised by the Director of Public Revenue Office to help the economy make the tax system liquid and predictable. So this is in the context of tax reform, and fairness is one of the aspects. If you view the figures from 29, we raised it to 31% of GDP on the revenue side, which is 2 percentage points of GDP less deficit if we are collecting the revenues. And this has happened in the last 5 years. So through this tax reform, I think this tax reform should be adopted in Parliament. The government had an inclusive process, and in Parliament, I hope within reasonable time, these reforms will be adopted. We have to clarify here, anything that is not revenues through taxes will mean debt, which means additional interest, additional burden for future generations. Borrowing is logical if we invest, because those are long-term projects, and the benefits from those projects will be felt by future generations. So there is intergenerational logic for them to pay these costs. However, regarding current expenditures and the policies we are implementing nowadays, fiscal consolidation and tax reforms are required, but I will go back to one point. These days, something is rather topical in terms of public administration, reform, salaries, and so on and so forth. And the Ministry of Finance is under the target in this period, and this is a complex matter. And in this regard, we have to have efficient administration. Nevertheless, at the same time, this administration has to be based on productivity in the entire economy, since the budget is filled by taxes from the economy. If there are no expenditures from the GDP, and public sector is the service to the economy and citizens, but to make the administration efficient, we need to stimulate them. We have a brain drain in the Ministry of Finance. So what can be undertaken to this end? That was the question. Do you have any aspects? I didn't finish my sentence. Micro and macro. The reform of the entire system has already started in the Ministry of Information Society, Labor and Social Policy, Ministry of Finance. A systemic solution is elaborated about, because individual solutions create distortions in the system, and those distortions are already in place at the public sector level, and it should be systemically resolved. And in the context of that, the Ministry of Finance has a similar situation as a line ministry, we have a more complex duty compared to the other ministers and ministries, because we are talking about the entire budget and we need to respond in most of the cases by no, because such are the possibilities. So this credibility of the Ministry of Finance must not be wobbly and provoked in any event, because it relates to the entire budget and entire government, and in this regard, the Ministry of Finance is managing this in terms of fiscal consolidation and entire administration. But we need to base our views, as was done last year, compared to minimum wages in the public sector and other challenges. So unfortunately, this is coming at the most difficult time, where we have the problem of egg or the chicken, whether the salaries should be aligned with the cost of living, or will the salaries get into the inflationary spiral. And in this regard, the good management with this process is very important, and to take a systemic approach for the entire public sector, such that it can go hand in hand with the private sector development. Thank you, Mr. Minister. Great points. Therefore, the Minister is called the Treasury Safeguard, because he needs to make sure that aspects on both sides are met and satisfied. The Governor will speak about the monetary policy, and in the center of attention, not only our central bank and monetary policy, but globally. And I'll share a metaphor. If the financial system is the blood bloodstream in the body, then the heart is the central bank. So it's not simple to have the role of the central bank, and the governor can understand such pressures very well, especially inflationary pressures and challenges in the previous period. And we need to open an issue related to the fiscal policy. In the context of that, respected Governor, what are the key challenges, what concerned you most last year, both in monetary and financial areas? Briefly, what did you undertake? And I pose a similar question to the Minister. And what did you not undertake and you should have undertaken? And can you do it in the future? Okay. Good day to you all. First of all, let me thank you for the invitation by the government to take part in this conference, especially to the Ministry of Finance and the Minister that is organizing this panel. I think that in the central banking community, there's no dilemma that the key challenge last year was the high inflation, which in fact is confirmed by the latest research by the World Economic Forum, where number one global and not national risk is the crisis of cost of living and inflation. We are all clear that after a lengthy period of 1 decade of low inflation, virtually between 2021, starting from 2021, we've started seeing upward trends in this area, such that last year, historically highest levels were reached in almost all economies, especially more pronounced in the less developed transitional economies in the area of Central and Southeast Europe. It went up to 13.4%, and here it is 14.2%. In spite of the fact that this is a global phenomenon, there wasn't an economy not affected by these shocks. Still, the differences are visible between the more developed and less developed economies, which means that the same global shock differently affects economies depending on their domestic factors, structural factors, and institutional factors and types of policies undertaken. Basically, the more economies are open to trades and the more they're energy dependent, even with and economies where energy, foods affect personal consumption, those economies as a rule, are more vulnerable to these shocks, and an example for this is our economy. One more important factor that affects the differences in inflation are the policies. Experience shows that economies having less targeted measures and acting more quickly, trying to prevent the growth of inflation, had lower inflation. This is not the wisest approach because it provides short-term results, but it doesn't send significant market signals. Inflation went up and it sustained for a longer period of time, and it influenced the financial expectations in our country and in all economies generally, which is clearly confirmed by the European Central Bank. We are all familiarized with the fact that in the conditions of inflation expectations growth, there is a risk of increasing the salaries to follow the inflation, which is especially vulnerable in terms of our economy where the productivity is low. So in this context, central banks did not have other choice, rather, in spite of the fact that the inflation was not a classical monetary shock, they couldn't act differently than increasing the interest rates with different measures and ways depending on various factors, the nature of inflation, meaning different drives of inflation, more factors in terms of demand and supply, and the monetary approach by the central bank. I wish to underline that last year we faced the most synchronized cycle of tightening the monetary policy in global terms in the last 50 years. In our country, focusing on our experience, more specifically to what Professor Treneski has mentioned, is that our monetary strategy to sustain a stable foreign exchange rate compared to the domestic currency, we have two key factors, that is to say the foreign exchange rate, the pressures on the exchange rate, and financial pressures. In conditions of the escalation of the energy shock by the end of 2021, we clearly noted the pressures in these two areas, and since then the response of monetary policy has been in place, first through the instruments trying to affect liquidity to keep it at the optimum level, not creating additional pressures on the demand side, and then the interest rates, not only of the basic instrument, we use the mandatory reserve, and we strengthened it through macro prudent measures. Basically, we belong to those central banks that started back in 2021 with the response to this inflation. They took gradual measures, but frequent measures, taking into account all the latest information in this uncertain ambience, using all the budget users, departing from the specifics of our economy compared to the central banks relying only on interest rates. So this is an example that the response was not a classical monetary phenomenon. So all the policymakers in the area of finance and measures taken in the area of energy and food, especially supported by the stabilization of the world food prices, the inflation for the first time in November last year, the annual inflation rate went down, and we are expecting for this trend to go in the same direction. In the context of expectations, I can see that one question goes forward, backward looking, and the other forward looking. This is the name of our today's conference. So the next discussion, the next thesis that I wish to raise, you're usually conservative, you usually have accurate projections compared to the IMF and World Bank. We have most conservative projections in terms of inflation and monetary activity, and central bank is especially cautious. What should we be concerned about in terms of the monetary policies forward-looking? This is the first thesis. The second thesis is that we are reaching a period where not only inflation but pressures on both economic and social areas. All these crises pressure all policies, fiscal policy, social policy, any policy, even monetary policy. So what do you think in the context of coordination of this monetary policy with the other policies? Because you're all under pressure. What is the importance of coordination? Is there any room for concerns?
Of course, this is a set of questions, and I think that the main feature of this 2023, of course, will be uncertainty, and this is clearly reflected in the macroeconomic expectations of all international institutions. And this year we expect that the global growth will slow down. The positive news today is that the IMF, after a long session of downward revisions of the growth, has made some moderate and yet certain growth. But in essence, we're still underlining that there are still emphasized risks, and we expect that most of the economies that carry 1/3 of the global GDP will enter recession in the forthcoming period. And this points out to the fact that we, as a small and open economy, depending on the global circumstances, will face a lot of challenges and will need to tackle them wisely. The scenarios for the Macedonian economy, both by the international institutions and the central bank, are that we will not have recession. We expect two-digit inflation from last year, 14.2%. Regarding the precision of the projections, yes, we were quite precise. We projected 14.3 inflation for last year, and it reached 14.2. And we expect this two-digit inflation will become one digit, ranging from 8 to 9%. And what is significant, we expect that in all segments, key segments for our economy, will be stable. The exchange rate will be stable and the banking system will be stable. However, this scenario will be accomplished depending on several factors. As I mentioned, the global context, the geopolitical risks that we cannot influence, the vulnerability, the structural features of our economy that, of course, cannot be changed in very short time, but our obligation is to change them in order to reduce vulnerability. And of course, it will depend on the consistent and coordinated approach of the macroeconomic policies. And here I refer to the monetary and fiscal policy, as you mentioned. The basic rule is that the coordination between the monetary and fiscal policy is of key importance for keeping the macroeconomic stability and for creation ambience of greater economic growth in all economies and in all phases of the economic cycle, especially in times of crisis. Therefore, the key challenge in the future period will be to continue the prudent and well-coordinated macroeconomic policies, prudent monetary policy, prudent fiscal policy, a mix that will be based on measures directed at all segments that are mostly struck in the economy, but also measures that will mean acceleration of the capital investments that are planned in the budget for this year, because these can significantly raise the potential for growth of our economy, and together in combination with the structural reforms to help the transformation of our economy that is a key challenge both for decision-making, policy-making, and for the business sector. This is very important for our economy, where the level of our income is only about 40% of the European level of income, and this correlates with the structural factors and is a clear indicator of the fact that our productivity is only 40% of the European one. And the key response to all these challenges and the closing of gaps must come from the structural policies. It cannot come from the macroeconomic policies, because these have a smaller role and cannot be the main factor. Thank you, Governor. I think we are good with the time. Maybe we can exchange views and reflect. But you mentioned the efficiency. The efficiency is one of the basic preconditions for such coordination. Yes, the efficiency is on part of public expenditures, but also collection of public incomes. We have the director of the Public Revenue Office, Madam Lukarovska. We mentioned that the Public Revenue Office is the right hand of the Ministry of Finance with regard to collection of taxes and incomes. And here we have a question related to the efficiency of collection of incomes. Of course, informal economy is one of the main issues. The Minister of Finance mentioned this. And I would like to know, Madam Lukarovska, regarding the efficiency of the collection. You had a new system, you introduced a new system, you had legal amendments, cash payments. You made several changes in order to improve the efficiency, and yet there is still a dilemma that the collection can be improved in future. I would like to ask you, what do you think of this? Is the collection sufficient? And if not, what are the key challenges? Institutional, human resources, political, economic ones? Why, although this is a midterm task, why the collection of income and taxes is on good level? You know this better than me, and I would like to hear what you think in context of challenges. What should we focus on in the future period? Thank you. I would like to welcome you all and thank you for the honor to be at this panel with these renowned persons. I think that we're all part of the budget and the social functioning. What I would like to underline, the successful collection of incomes by the tax administration enables functioning of all sectors in the society. Without budget, we cannot complete our plans, both of the government and relevant factors and stakeholders. We're not alone in this. We are supported by the Ministry of Finance, of course, the Customs Administration, but most of all, we are supported by the chambers because they debate with us, we resolve dilemmas, and of course, the disciplined taxpayers, and I would especially like to welcome them. I would like to say that the better we fill the budget, the better we will accomplish the plans for the following years. I think that the Ministry of Finance gives us an expanded plan year by year, and this is a challenge for us. It is not an obstacle. In that regard, the numbers are on our side. I will share them with all of you, but this doesn't mean that it is sufficient. Of course, we can do more. We can collect more, and this is related to all the legal preconditions that we have on one part, and on the other, the fight against gray economy, informal economy, and the most important part, of course, the digitalization of the processes. This means modernization and following all international developments. In that regard, I can say that we are keeping up with the efficiency and the realization of projects that will enable easier and more efficient services towards the taxpayers. Last year, we collected about 104 billion dinars. That is by more than 18% higher compared to 2001. We have growth regarding the profit tax. We have collected about 45% more compared to 2021, 16% more personal income tax, and I would like to reiterate the alleviation we made with the tax report through the EPDD system. This is the base for many other institutions for whom we submit data to several ministries, economy, finance, etc. We're involved in all those processes that mean exchange of data and delivery of exact numbers. Of course, we have higher collection of the value-added tax by 11.3% compared to 2021. I would not like to speak about the set of measures that were provided for the economy and the liquidity. The measure of subsidizing compensations up to 6,000 dinars. We're visiting disciplined taxpayers who should be an example of how all of us should function in the economy. And I think that in this way, we are encouraging not only the large taxpayers who are the pillar of the budget, and we expect them to provide the largest incomes, but also the small and micro enterprises. This is the basic benefit that we have regarding the return of profit. This was an effort made with the Ministry of Finance. We wanted to return this within 30 days back to the taxpayers. In 2022, 44.7 billion dinars were returned, and this is quite more than 30% compared to 2021, 75 more compared to 2020, and 72% more compared to 2019. These are the efforts of the World Bank, of the IMF, that regular return is in fact the base so that the companies can function and remain liquid, and this will enable us higher income side. Thank you for this discussion. You spoke of the critical points. You said that it is not sufficient, so you will pressure to increase the efficiency of the system. This is a great message. And you mentioned all the key pillars that are of particular importance in the Public Revenue Office. You mentioned the digitalization, good solutions, human resources, return to the business, because it is directly related to you more than to the Ministry of Finance. So you present the fiscal image before the citizens. I know that you have some educational activities. It is very important. You educate the taxpayers, but also the public, because the behavioral aspect is very important regarding the collection of incomes, and it can be improved in future. What both the minister and you mentioned in context of the informal economy, it is about 20 to 30% according to the last calculations, and it is a reservoir that can increase the public incomes. But my question is in that regard. We've discussed it on several panels and occasions. What do you plan to do in future in order to suppress the gray economy? We're constantly speaking about this, and it remains as a dilemma. How much time is needed? It should be announced that it's not a short-term action, but we want to know more about the fight against informal economy. It is related to the fiscal policy, but also to the public image before the citizens. Yes, thank you. Regarding the gray economy, of course, we have several challenges. This means that we'll have new projects. The greatest challenge that awaits both us and the Ministry of Finance is the e-invoice project that will detect the risk factors among the large taxpayers and the other ones. It will enable reducing of fictitious invoices, the false image of the reports that are delivered and the documents that are delivered by the taxpayers to the Public Revenue Office, and of course the other institutions, and it will enable delivery and receipt of the invoice in electronic form. We are very sensitive in the preparation of all the steps to develop this project on the highest possible level, and we want to enable a longer test period so that the taxpayers can adjust to this new project. There was let's say, interesting statement by foreign experts who paid visits to us in the ministry to suppress the roller coaster movement made by the taxpayers in their operation. This will be the greatest challenge in the forthcoming period, and we will try to introduce and complete the e-fiscalization that is on very high level in the neighboring countries. We will do this so that we can have successful tax information system within the project we have with the World Bank and the EU delegation to our countries, so that we can integrate the information system for public finance management. I think that here we are very committed to all these segments that will mean successful fight against the gray economy. We speak frequently and a lot about the fight against gray economy, but only coordinated approach and mutual support of one institution towards another one, I believe that we will succeed to fight gradually, because this is very, very painful for the whole society. No matter the fact that we hear the companies, we have partnerships with them, we need to successfully fight the informal economy. UNDP helps us a lot in this campaign. Also, the transfer goals prices will be very successful and will give its contribution to this reform, because it secured balanced approach to the fight with informal economy and detection of places where we can draw income. I will invest my efforts for better human resources in the Public Revenue Office, the inspectorates, and all institutions that should control the developments. Of course, we have our own views regarding amendments to the laws. This gives us a broader spectrum of competences and authorities so that we can be successful in detecting tax evasion. We work very transparently, and I think that we should not forget the trilateral agreement we signed with Serbia and Albania, because it means exchange of data regarding individuals who have a lot of income not reported in our country, and data that mean tax evasion of companies and they're seated in our country and in some of the two other countries. We have several cases that will be resolved soon. Thank you, Madam Lukarovska. The discussion on informal economy will continue. The coordination of the sectors is very important. Activities should be published. This is a gradual process, but no one should be excused, and we need overall coordination. We can reflect on that again. And now I would continue with Mr. Begeti. I would like to ask you about taxes and the public revenues, but I will start from another topic, the public expenditures, something that the minister mentioned and opened as a topic in this discussion, the efficiency of the public expenditures. We often analyze. We had some research, not only our country, but the countries from the region can have 20 to 25% greater output in capital expenditures. This is about 30 to 40%. These are published researches. So we have a great reservoir on increasing the efficiency of the public expenditures. Academician Begeti often discusses this topic. We opened several questions, and I would like to ask you, what do you think? What should we do in line of improving for the country to improve the efficiency of the realization of the public expenditures? The ministers mentioned something about merging of institutions, new systems, new law on budget, program budgeting. We are mentioning CPI, but what do you think that can make some serious movements in the forthcoming period? Thank you. Esteemed guests, You know, after 2 years of COVID crisis and 1 year of inflation and energy crisis, not only the economy is tired, but also the economic science. It is being challenged. It can no longer find creative solutions for dealing with challenges in period that no one knows when it will end. When we met the COVID-19 crisis, we thought that we will overcome it by redesigning the expenditure side, because the income side failed us. And this was a good occasion, and it showed that we have opportunities. Before you find yourself in such situation, you cannot work on solutions. So that is why we should look for opportunities in this year, because it was shown that the wasted fiscal space on the side of revenues during the crisis gave us opportunities to find fiscal space on the side of expenditures. And I think that the government, with the measures it implemented, the anti-COVID measures, had some quality restructuring, but not sufficient and not efficiently enough, not timely enough, because the transmission channels were stuck. However, it showed that there is space to do this. Greater savings were done in the budget line of goods and services. This trend continues even today. However, it is not sufficient. The relation of the economy on aggregate level should start from the public expenditures, because the third pillar of the fiscal space is exactly the public debt, because as a consequence of the COVID was increased by 11%, opposite to the increase of the EU member states with more than 15%. So this would return us to restructuring of the side of incomes from all aspects. The regressive tax system should be transferred into mild progression. We've been working in these reforms for 2 years. We defined concepts, strategy, we have concrete measures, and now we are here because the business community has justification, has alibi. Times of crisis, economic history, especially fiscal history, show us that during great crisis, greatest reforms, fiscal reforms were made. So if I return to the side of expenditures, we have new law on budget and mechanisms and solutions within. There are budget rules, fiscal council, and other mechanisms that will... Academician Budget, do you think this will bring more efficiency? Yes, it will increase the efficiency, but it should be applied consistently. Yes, we adopted the law on budget and we foresee these measures and mechanisms. Even the performance of the budget users regarding capital investments, regarding transmission to the local community, and in that regard, we are not succeeding to conduct this fully because we have no institutional capacity. We lack institutional capacities in the institutions. People who know how to consistently apply rules are going away. 1,350 institutions in the country intermingled with various authorities that are in fact doubled and are overlapping, and they create obstacles so that they can justify their existence, and the institutions are inefficient. In that regard, we have a lot of work. The institutional channels must be cleared out, and it must be very clear who is responsible for what. On local level also, state national enterprises, enterprises with state capital, regulation bodies. We have mishmashed in institutional structure in the country. So the fiscal discipline must be followed in regard of prevention and education. No one on behalf, and now don't get me wrong, on behalf of fiscal autonomy, even if it was regulatory body, judiciary, prosecution, on behalf of independence to make themselves intransparent. They must be accountable. Accountability and responsibility, and then independence. Academician Budgeti, this was an excellent point, especially regarding the operation of the institution. I totally agree. We witnessed this. We're part of the Economic Council, and during the COVID, we understood that it was not the design of the measures, but their delivery to the end user. They wanted operational channels. Now we're facing the same with the applications for photovoltaics. So you said, well, institutions should be cleared out. Should someone work better? It is an important factor. Now I'm interested because you mentioned something about the tax and taxation. The policy creators mentioned their part. Now let us hear the academia. What do you think in context of tax reform? Should it be done in such conditions? Is it the time? How can it be developed? Are the pillars the ones mentioned by the minister, or there should be other pillars? What is the trajectory that could be developed in future for the tax reform in midterm, 3 to 5 years? Where do we see ourselves regarding the tax reforms? When we were working on the last version of tax reforms, there were 2 or 3 important issues. We all agreed that the system is very regressive. It is disproportionate regarding the harmonization with the fiscal policy of Europe. 2/3 of incomes are collected in our country from indirect taxes, and it is opposite in the EU member states. A total disproportion. Here we need to start introducing certain progression in both aspects, both in income, personal income, and maybe then turning it into a family income, a solution used in the US, and with corporate incomes and tax. We have a mild progression. Certain simulations we have conducted with very mild second rate, first rate 10 and second rate 15%, and we receive additional income in the budget with 100,000 dinars. It is quite high, so we have 18 million euros in the budget. This is a lot for education, for health, for social subsidies. This is a lot of money. Only regarding income. And if we go to the third item, as we go closer to the integration process, let's put us the expenditure aside. Let's go to the corporate tax. Another data. The 100 most profitable companies in the country have almost 14% income from the total profit of the country. And this is 1% or less than 1%, 100 companies. The simulations show that only through progression of the rate of 20% of the 100 most profitable companies, even a profit of 1 million, the effect will be 70 million euros. These are mild changes. They will not disrupt the system, the economy will not suffer slowing down. In neither theory or science, it was assessed that the increase of taxes will suppress the economy. But it is true that proportionate to the increased taxes, we will not improve the quality of services that are delivered by the country. We must secure a system of improvement through the collection of taxes. We must offer better services, education, for example, because companies complain. Why should they pay taxes? This question was asked quite late. But however, they say that the taxes that are not paid are insufficient because we have a lack of quality in education. And that is how I see the connection. Later, green taxes were mentioned. We have not even started to address this issue. Eco taxes have already been introduced. Polluters pay, and polluters should pay. They should neutralize the negative impact in the society. And the effect in our country is opposite. They pollute and they receive good state conditions. We should minimize as much as possible the basic exemption and alleviation. We should expand the base of scope of the taxpayers. Only with these four measures we will significantly increase the efficiency of the public revenues in the country. Without any great reforms, because we're constantly speaking of reforms and we're scaring the business community. It should be gradual, 13%, 15%, 20%. And finally, the profit tax that are not for the merit of the companies. Everyone introduced this. Greece introduced 90% of tax to the energy company. Poland introduced 50% of tax to the energy companies and supermarkets. And I would not like to mention others. We have some great bankers here, so I would not like to scare them or something. Thank you, Mr. Bajiti. I look at the clock. I would like us to be quite punctual. This was an excellent summary of the key factors for both public expenditures and incomes. The Public Revenue Office Director and the Minister said that this is a complete system that we're discussing all the time before collecting the tax. You spoke of the bottlenecks in the channels. There are a lot of calculated funds that are not part of the budget because they have not been collected. The system did not comply with the laws. Now I would like to turn to our last speaker for today. We will have one set, maybe later we'll have 30 seconds to 1 minute for some final message that they would send to our audience. Now we'll hear from Mr. Bishev, advisor to the Prime Minister, a great experience in banking sector. Our academician Bajiti said that we have bankers and representatives from the bank, so we should mention something more about the banking sector. What is its story? We know that it is stable and highly profitable. If we look into the last years, it is quite strong because in terms of crisis, the strong banking sector supports the economy, and this is a closed circle that we should respect, but also we should think in that direction. We have some movements on the international markets. Global policies are more strict. So, Mr. Bishop, what are the challenges and opportunities of the banking sector, and especially with regard to the future, especially the banking and financial sector? What should we be cautious about?
Thank you. It is a pleasure to be part of the discussion at this panel today. I would start with saying that in principle the banking is a cycling industry. It is in principle following the principles of the economy, and in periods of good times there are good profits when there is growth, and it's strengthening the capital power. In bad times it is using the capital strength or power to absorb the risks that it faces. The Americans are calling this you're fixing the roof when it is sunny, not when it's raining. Seeing it from this aspect, I believe that the Macedonian banking industry, together with the holders of the microeconomic policies, have managed to build a very solid roof and healthier roof that can absorb the challenges coming from the recession. The capital power of the banking sector is relatively high. The balance of the central bank in conditions of COVID did not expand. Such was the case in the highly developed countries, for example, the US of A. The European Central Bank increased its investment for about 35%, the Macedonian bank for about 20%. So we had slight budget deficit. We have 55% of debt. So the crisis that is coming, whether through the high inflation or through the recession that is expected in 2023, should for both the banks and the holders of the economic policies to be absorbed, since there are solid fundamentals. The good news is that this is a cyclic crisis, not a crisis caused by structural factors, such was the case in 2018-2019, when we had a collapse of the financial sector. What are the challenges here? The first challenge is the reduced realistic power, buying power of the population and the income of the population. In 2 years in Macedonia, it would be 1 quarter, having in mind that the inflation for this year is anticipated to be 9%. For last year, it was an average of 14%. In December, it was 18.5%. So the question is what the indexation of the salaries will be, but this needs to remain so in order to avoid entering the spiral of inflation again. The second challenge are the high interest rates, which are at international levels increased for almost 4 times. That was the case in the last 15 years. It is expected that on the 2nd of February, this to reach the highest level for the last 15 years. This will increase the interest rate for the companies and for the population as well. And the question is raised whether the companies and the population will be able to service regularly their loan obligations. This is also going to impact the request for loans or credits. And the third challenge is Germany has announced that there is a negative economic growth. This will also contribute to creation of high credit risk, lowering of the credit capability, and creation of higher potential losses. Thank you, Mr. Bishop. This was a very good summary of the risks in the bank sector and the monetary policy, which means that we have solid banking system. There is no need for concern, but I believe that the banking system is being monitored regularly. What we're interested is, and we go back to where we discussed with the Minister of Finance about the budget, about the public debt. The second question, the final question, if I can say so, is in a direction, Mr. Bishop, is regarding the international financial markets. We are going into debt. We're talking about our future fiscal stability. What are your perspectives and thoughts about the international monetary markets? The financial markets can freeze in a short period of time, such was the period of the COVID pandemic, the start of it. We can have some stability, but what are your projections for the future? Whether our small open economies, such as our Macedonian economy, should be concerned that their approach or the price of at the international markets, financial markets, can grow. The price is already increased significantly, but if we're monitoring the markets, we will see that in the last 30 days, there has been a growth of the prices of the bonds, on the long-term bonds. This means alleviation of the interest rates, and there has been an increase at the markets, which means that this crisis, cyclic crisis of short-term character, for us as a small and open economy, this would mean that we need to be slightly concerned. The lowered level of Central European Bank is going to, of the balance, is going to be something to be concerned for us. This, by rule, happens very rarely in the banking system, so it means that you're slowing down, not reducing the growth of your system. The Central European Bank holds about 40% of the public bonds of the EU member countries, and according to this prognosis, the net value of the debt of the EU will be 50% less than what the European Central Bank can write in. This will create a lot of pressure to the public debt market, and this will be transferred to the financial markets and the economies that are gravitating towards the EU. What is good, and what I consider that the holders of the, or the makers of the banking policies are doing, is with the international financial institutions, they have decreased the debt, although the interest rates are high still, but the inflation rate at international level shows negative interest rate. Although if Macedonia manages to grow positively with the realistic gross domestic product, we are not going to be an economy that is indebted, and we will have a parallel consolidation of the budget. What we need to have in mind is that this high inflation rate is not going to last for long, and at the moment of its going down, the realistic interest rates are going to become positive, because the indebting today will be with a certain interest rate. These are the challenges that we have in front of the financial sector and the policies in this area, and there are challenges not only for our country but all the countries that are gravitating towards the EU. Thank you, Mr. Bishop. Excellent. In the context of the financial market, we have touched upon the budget, the sustainability, the structure, the tax reform, the public revenues, the reform of the public revenues, the monetary sphere, the monetary policy. We touched upon all the critical positions that are creating the soil, if I can say so, at which a certain plant should grow. It is a metaphor that I use. If you don't have fertile soil, you don't have the stability any economy activity that you will try to realize is not going to be successful or grow. So I hope that this has put a light on the, let's say, fogged windscreens or windshields. I'm not going to take any more of time. I will give about 30 seconds to each of you to send your final message. The minister started, and there has been a little bit of a long timing until he says his final words. 30 seconds for all of you. Thank you. The message would be that in the time of crisis, in peaceful times, we can slow the growth, but we cannot lose the direction. So, apart from what we need to do short term with the anti-crisis measures, we need to do the necessary reforms. We have mentioned all of them in that regard. I'm talking about the finances, talking about the increased transparency, accountability with regards to the efficiency. Everything was mentioned here by all of the panelists. This is the main message towards which we are going. Once again, in this process, we should not forget one important fact: building of capacities, institutional capacities, because we're striving to go towards the EU, and all these projects, activities without the institutional capacities and the human resources would not be possible. Thank you, Minister. Minister, your final statement. Yes, I would say that generally last year was extremely difficult year for all the holders of the or decision makers, since we had a very specific crisis that generated to a large degree and created very big inflation pressures. When you have growth inflation, then the maneuver space for new policies is very limited. We are aware that this space is still limited, and although the inflation is started to go down, it is still high. The public debt is still high, and the pressures in the energy sector are still high due to the trade deficit. To summarize, having in mind all the conditions, it's good that we managed to change the direction of the inflation, putting the realistic sector in the positive sphere at the same time, not in the negative zone of growth. And this was supported by the banking sector, which, regardless of the many challenges, not to forget, March and April last year were months of a lot of pressure. And additionally, what was very important for the inflation and the stability maintenance is the keeping of the stability of the value of the dinar, which is the basic microeconomic base. We need to stay focused on remaining and keeping the stability, and this will give us the direction for long-term growth. Mrs. Lukarevska, shortly. I will go back to what I said before. Only with coordinated approach, institutional support of the institutions among themselves, we will be able to implement all the projects. We will be able to realize all the strategies so that they do not remain only documents on a piece of paper. We need to go through the crisis periods together. If I'm talking about the Public Revenue Office, we need to continue with the partnership together with the citizens and build our sector. Thank you, Academic Begeti. Your final statement. Simply, my message would be to ask for higher social responsibility of the companies, and even
higher political responsibility of the politicians and the institutions on how they spend the public money. Because after 30 years of long and tired transition, we are still not going forward with certain aspects. I would mention education and health here, and we need to create conditions to keep the young people in the country. Because if we continue in this way, after 5 or 10 years, we will have no people, no one to sell to or to employ. Thank you, Mr. Bishop. Regarding the fiscal policy, long term, it needs to increase the efficiency of the public revenues, because without this, long term, there will be no supporters for the tax reforms, and from that aspect, short-term and long-term combinations are inevitable for the monetary policy. It needs to put down the monetary expectations. I don't know if the inflation of 8 to 9% is very clear for the monetary expectations from Macedonian. Thank you, Mr. Bishop. One sentence from me. There are many problems, there are many challenges in the next period on which we can discuss. Coordination and open discussion is the precondition for starting to find solution, not only between the political elites, but also all the stakeholders in the society. Thank you for all of you for your presence and for your discussion.